glad to have you joining us for this week's edition of Politics Unplugged. I'm Anne Trujillo.
And I'm Marshall Zelinger. Your chance to get more in-depth analysis of the issues facing voters.
Now this week, who is going to replace the late Justice Antonin Scalia on the U.S. Supreme Court? President Barack Obama has made his pick, nominating Judge Merrick Garland, who is respected across party lines and political lines in an epic power play, targeting the resolve of Republicans who have vowed to block any replacement for the late Justice Scalia until a new president takes office.
The position that we've taken consistently is that this is a decision that the American people can now make during an election year, and it's wrong in this far into the presidential election to have someone swing the court in a different direction without trusting the people to speak to that issue first.
We know Marco Rubio won't be the next president there. The Republican dropping out of the presidential race this week, saying he hopes his departure from the race can help strengthen the candidacies of Ted Cruz and John Kasich. Despite saying in the last debate he would support whoever the Republican nominee would be, listen to what Rubio said this past week.
Hopefully there's time to still, prevent a Trump nomination, which I think would fracture the party and be damaging to the conservative movement.
Okay, so how about that race for president? You have to admit, presidential politics, pretty exciting for the first time in a very long time. And joining us today are Democratic political consultant Laura Chapin. Thank you for being here. And former Colorado Republican Party Chair Dick Wadhams. Nice to have you both here.
Dick, let's start with you. But first, before we get into any analysis, we need to know where you stand on the Republican frontrunner, Donald Trump.
You know, I have trust in the primaries and the caucuses. He's our frontrunner. If he wins enough delegate votes, he's our nominee, and he's far superior to Hillary Clinton, and that's good enough for me.
I mean, that's refreshing compared to some other we've heard from leadership of the GOP. Is it too late to stop his momentum as so many of the establishment candidates or the established party want? Well,
he may or may not go into the Cleveland National Convention with a majority of votes. If he does, then he's the nominee. If he's just short, I imagine there will be an attempt to marshal the anti-Trump forces to deny him the nomination. I think that would be a very serious gamble, though, because if somehow he's denied the nomination and he's at 49% or 48%, that would split our party wide open and actually eliminate any way of defeating Hillary.
I want to see that. Not that I want to see the fracturing. I want to see that contested convention, because people want to see chaos, I guess, but it's unscripted at that point.
It is. I was at the last Republican convention that was in doubt going into the convention, 1976, Ford versus Reagan, and I got to tell you, the atmosphere was electric. It was a lot of fun, but I really don't want to see that in 2016.
I can imagine why.
But if that were to happen, what would that look like?
You know, and it would take probably 2 or 3 or 4 ballots. The last time we had 3 ballots, or more than 1 ballot at all, was 1948. When Thomas Dewey was nominated on the 3rd ballot. I think the Democrats had a multi-ballot convention back in the 1950s, or I think. Yeah. But they're exciting, but they're also terribly, they can be terribly divisive, so we'll see what happens.
Well, Laura, as you counsel Democrats, do you tell them to reference this chaos that's going on with the GOP, or just let that go and talk about themselves and their issues?
Frankly, I think every Republican has to be asked whether or not they'll stand behind Donald Trump as the nominee. I mean, that's the bottom line. Whether they like it or not, Republicans have a candidate that is fracturing their party. The question is whether or not they think he will help them on the ticket or hurt them on the ticket. I actually saw Tony Fratto, who's a former Bush spokesperson, say at this point, if Trump's the nominee, the best we can do is try and salvage the Senate.
Man.
I mean, both of you have worked on successful campaigns. If Donald Trump was your candidate, how would you advise him to proceed from here on out? I mean, especially as he's looking to...
I don't think anybody gives Donald Trump advice, and that's part of their problem. He literally said his foreign policy advisor is himself.
I heard that last week. Who do you talk to first? I talk to me.
I talk to me, but I do think it's awful. I think the president made some very smart remarks when he said that Donald Trump is damaging the American brand, not just the Republican brand. How we stand in the world, our prestige, actually matters, and the fact that other countries are putting Donald Trump on the cover of German magazines and French magazines and Italian magazines and questioning the sanity of our country in nominating this profoundly unqualified man to lead the country, I think is I mean, I'm not a fan of Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz, but the idea that someone who is this contemptuous of everything we stand for stands the chance of winning a major party nomination is really a really bad reflection on what's happened.
I see Dick Wadhams over here antsy to jump in. Awful?
Listen, I cannot condone a lot of the comments that Donald Trump has made about Megyn Kelly, about the New York Times reporter that was disabled. But I also know this, is that he's a very capable individual. I think he would be a very strong president if he got elected. And I also think he makes Democrats more nervous than they are saying they are at this point. There was a big story today about labor unions very concerned about the appeal that he's making to blue-collar Democrats. These former Reagan Democrats, these voters who have never voted before, who are entering into the political process and entering into the Republican Party. And I remember something else, too. It's hard to remember, but a lot of people thought that Ronald Reagan, in fact, people on the Democratic side, thought that Ronald Reagan was too old, too extreme, would blow up the world if he got elected. And now he's regarded one of our most successful presidents. So I take a lot of this denigration and dismissal of Donald Trump with a grain of salt. I think he would rise to the occasion.
But American demographics have so changed since then. I saw a recent Gallup poll that had Donald Trump at -65 among Latinos. The electorate that elected Ronald Reagan is not the electorate that we have in 2016. I saw another number that said in order for Donald Trump to win, he's going to have to win something like 70-odd+% of the white male vote. Mitt Romney got the highest percent of any Latino vote of any Republican who's ever run, and he still lost by 5 points.
That's not true. George Bush got a much higher percentage, but let me jump in. Doyle McManus from the Los Angeles Times, he is no conservative columnist or reporter. He had a column in today's LA Times where he talks about he went around and talked to a lot of the supporters in Florida of Donald Trump, and he came to the conclusion that anybody who dismisses Trump's ability to ultimately appeal to Hispanics and African Americans better think twice based on the conversations he had in Florida with Trump supporters there. So I think Trump is much more formidable than a lot of people give him credit for, than I gave him credit for even as recently as a couple of months ago. This race is going to get close, and I think Democrats are more scared of him than they say.
Well, I would also point, though, to the Republican super PAC ad that's been run against Donald Trump that uses his own words about women against him. The Republican super PAC will be running that right now. The Democratic super PAC will be running it this fall. I don't remember his exact numbers among women, but it's bad and it's dropping like a rock. So I go by not anecdotal evidence. I go by actual numbers, and the numbers are that right now Donald Trump is enormously underwater with the very demographics that need to elect a president.
Right now he is. He is right now, and that's a snapshot in time.
Well, the first real hurdle, though, really is getting all Republicans behind him, right?
That's correct, and that is a big question. And Cleveland could break the Republican Party in two, or we could come out united behind a candidate. And who knows at this point? But that is the big question mark.
My personal over/under is what the Bush family does. I will be fascinated to see if they either stay neutral or potentially get behind Hillary, given the longtime family friendship that George Bush Sr. has with Bill Clinton. So I'll be watching to see if they give the okay for moderate Republicans to either stay out or possibly even support Hillary.
Okay, so on that line, let's talk about the trickle-down effect of what happens with the presidential race, what it does to the U.S. Senate race, and all of these Republicans, right now 13 candidates trying to become the nominee to take on U.S. Senator Michael Bennet. How impactful does a Trump candidacy versus someone else trickle down to what could happen with this Republican race?
It could very well affect it, Marshall, because we've seen in the past that presidential campaigns can impact what's going on below. But I would remind you that George Bush was winning re-election in 2004 while Ken Salazar was defeating Pete Coors for the U.S. Senate. And so Colorado voters do have an independent streak. They'll vote for one. Look at what they did with Cory Gardner and John Hickenlooper just a year ago, or 2 years ago. And so Colorado voters are very independent, but there's no doubt that the high-profile nature of this presidential race does have an impact down ticket at times.
All right, we have about 30 seconds left. Laura, we'll let you have the last word here.
I will say at this point, I'm a lot happier to be on my side than I am to be a Republican. I think at this point we are perfectly content to let Hillary work her way towards the nomination, to turn out our voters, and to let the Republicans fight it out on their side.
And Dick?
I think that the Senate race will be fought on its own terms.
Now, briefly, you said Trump would be a strong president. I've had so many people stand to the side of me telling me the opposite. Can you give me one or two quick things as to why you believe that?
Well, I'm not a supporter of Donald Trump. I think you look at his background and you can tell that he has conducted himself with great strength and clarity of purpose as a businessman. I think we would expect the same thing as president if he became president.
You were sounding like a supporter earlier. Interesting. All right, stay with us. We'll be right back.